So I guess we are ready to start. We have already the first attendees in the room. So welcome everyone to our webinar on the DCS about collecting your money in the face of COVID-19. Just a few information for all the attendees. You can access the chat and Q&A on the right-hand side, and then you can post any questions you may have during the presentation. We'll have the Q&A session in the end. So for the ones who don't know me, I'm Vinicius. I'm the finance manager at Exchange, and I have here with me Robert Andreu. He's connecting from Tampa, Florida, and Robert is a specialist in debt collection, and he will have a interesting presentation to us today. So Robert, without no further ado, the stage is yours.
Well, awesome, Vinny. Thanks so much. And you know, I'm here today because I figured out a long time ago that my passion in life is really helping businesses, manage accounts receivable. And in doing such, I think that it's really given me a great purpose. So I started in the debt collection industry more than 30 years ago and, frankly, never looked back. About 18 years ago, I started the commercial collection division of Hunter Warfield. And I have to share, it's been really nice to know that I've been able to help so many companies, both large and small, recover so much lost revenue. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So with our agenda, we're going to spend our time talking about accounts receivable. Briefly, we'll touch on collectively where we are in the face of COVID-19 and how that affects us collecting money. We'll spend some time discussing ways to objectively assess your accounts receivable. I've picked out two specific methods which we'll touch on. So if you don't currently measure your accounts receivable, you'll have something that you can use going forward. We'll touch on a few techniques to help you get outstanding accounts receivables paid as well. But even more important than just getting the accounts receivable paid, you also want to keep your customers. And sometimes pushing your customers for payment, of course, can cause some animosity. So I'll show you some techniques to minimize this as well. And then certainly we'll make some time for questions as well. So let's start with where we are currently. And there, frankly, isn't a person on this webinar, nor a person not on the webinar, who could have predicted this pandemic. The likelihood of predicting this pandemic is just about as likely as predicting a date the aliens would land on the Earth. All right, well, maybe even a little less likely than predicting when aliens will land on Earth. But all kidding aside, the pandemic is absolutely unprecedented. I mean, around the world, millions of people have been infected, thousands and thousands losing their lives. Governments across the globe issuing mandatory stay-at-home orders, businesses shutting down, other businesses making changes to allow their employees to continue working from home. Not to mention people have difficulties even getting a darn haircut. But is it really unprecedented? Well, what can we compare it to? So let's first look at other disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes. And they're somewhat similar, but usually damage is mostly localized. So within a single area or a relatively small impacted area. A recession, again, somewhat similar, but businesses are still operating for the most part. And sometimes a recession is felt domestically or even globally. But often during a business, there's some businesses that just don't make it. How about an economic downturn? Again, similar to a recession, where sometimes it's felt in a local area, other times it's, widespread. So we're all very well aware of the reach of COVID throughout the entire world. Some places worse than others, but virtually every corner of the earth has been affected. With that in mind, I'm pretty comfortable in saying that COVID-19 is indeed unprecedented and frankly, much different than anything that we've seen, well, at least in our lifetime. So in the previous slide, 3 of the 4 things that I mentioned disaster, recession, economic downturn. Let's just say, for the sake of an argument, assume that each time one of those things occurred, it affected your business. Obviously, that's not the case, but let's say a large area of where your best clients are located is hit by a hurricane. And then 6 months later, it finds itself in the middle of an economic downturn, and then it turns into a full-blown recession. If you look at it in that fashion, these issues, especially if one comes after the other, they don't look quite so different than COVID. So why am I mentioning this? It's simply this. Difficult times from the last slide are so much different than the COVID pandemic, but at the same time, aren't that much different in several fashions. So how we look at receivables, our money, and how we analyze our receivables, dare I say how we count our receivables and our money, meaning our bank accounts, 401k plans, stocks, and accounts receivable, cannot and should not be different than how we analyze those things when life is great. So understanding this, how we analyze our financial well-being and accounts receivable, it's a great place to start in understanding the present situation that we find ourselves in, collecting money in the face of the coronavirus. So I mentioned previously analyzing our money. So there's many aspects of our lives that pertain to counting money, but today and for our context, we'll look at it as only concerning accounts receivable. So let's for a second take ourselves back to January 1st. We'll call this pre-COVID. So the question is, before I get to the question, I'm pretty comfortable in saying that most people would agree that on January 1st of 2020, the economy wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. So with that in mind, pre-COVID, were receivables closer to an afterthought when it comes to your business, or were they a precise focus? So our poll question asked what your thoughts are on that. So on January 1st, how are receivables in your business? And please start the poll. So let's just take a minute or two here, and we'll let people answer the poll question. And okay, so we should have our poll answers pretty quickly. All right, sorry about that, and maybe you have the poll now. Okay, so most people say receivables are good. Wouldn't say great, but good. Some people said just okay. Nobody in January said, somebody get me a doctor or an attorney, we need help. So let's now fast forward to today some. So on August 1st, a little more than a month ago, how's COVID affected your business, specific to accounts receivable? So please start that poll. And here we go. Okay, so wait a second for answers to come in. All right, looks like we're getting a few answers, but interestingly enough, we have a little bit of a difference here. And so a third of the people said receivables are just okay. Some say receivables are not so good. Others say they're good, not great. Nobody says receivables are great. And we even got some folks that say skip the doctor or attorney. Somebody call a priest. Receivables are an issue. Well, that, of course, leads us to where we are today and what we're going to talk about in this fashion. So I think that, let me share this first. You know, pretty much all day, every day for, gosh, the last 30 years, I talk to business owners and presidents, sometimes the credit managers. And most of the people tell me that when business is good, they keep an eye on the receivables, unless something else more important comes up. Sometimes they can go maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks without even reviewing receivables because they don't have time to. So my point is, although we may have looked at receivables different in January than we did in August, that's not good. Receivables shouldn't be looked at differently regardless if your business is good or bad. This is such a key component to managing accounts receivable, and you have to have the same focus on accounts receivable when business is good as when it isn't so good. So my first suggestion would be to take the time to take the subjective nature of receivables out of the picture, and let's do it objectively with hard data. And so the first thing that I'm going to talk about, a way to do that, assessing your current receivables, is with a tool called DSO, Days Sales Outstanding. So the definition of this is this figure expresses the average time in days that receivables are outstanding. It helps determine if a change in receivable age is due to a change in sales or perhaps another factor such as selling terms, or perhaps even COVID. This is a great indication of how effectively a company manages its receivables. So the next one that we're going to talk about is called CEI, Collection Effectiveness Index. This figure expresses the effectiveness of collection efforts over time. So the closer to 100% that you get, the more effective the collection efforts are. It's a measure of the quality of collection of receivables, not of time. So this formula helps establish what comprehensive trends are happening right now. And again, the important thing is having a good barometer or understanding of where your receivables are and taking the subjective nature out, making sure that you're using the objective nature. So let's start. We're going to get to another poll here in a second, but as we find ourselves in the face of COVID, the likelihood of customers owing you money is increasing. So I'd appreciate it at this time if you participate in another poll. And at this time, I'd like you to answer, what tool do you find most helpful in managing accounts receivable issues? So Vinny, can you bring that poll up? Great. And we'll just give it a minute or so. And so as we look at this, it seems like calling a customer on the phone is the best method. Going to see a customer in person has also got some value, and looks like utilizing a debt collection agency can provide some insight and help as well. Very interesting. So I appreciate everybody participating in that. So let's move on to some steps in handling accounts receivable. So when you're owed money, much of what you do at this point is really predicated on the preparation for situations when this happens. So I'll say it again, and I'll continue to fly this banner, but preparations, the steps that you took when a customer was a brand new customer, is more than likely the biggest and best tool that you can have in your tool belt for these times when someone owes you money. So what do you do as a company to prepare for this situation? Do you have credit applications for customers that receive 30-day terms? Sometimes I speak with people who feel that their customers won't fill out a credit application. Well, let me ask you, when's the last time that you personally got credit from, a bank or a store and didn't fill out a credit application? Probably never, right? So another tool is a personal guarantee. Again, sometimes people feel that their customers won't sign personal guarantees and they refuse to do business with them. And I can't tell you how many times over the years I've heard personal guarantees don't work in my business. So for clarity, I don't want to suggest that if Home Depot needs 1,000 containers that you refuse unless you get a signed personal guarantee. But what I am suggesting is that if a company who started business 3 weeks ago and asks you for 100 containers and they want open credit terms, personal guarantee is a pretty good idea. So the next thing we're going to talk about is actual steps that you can take in resolving accounts receivable. So for this, let's assume that the preparation piece, meaning credit application, personal guarantee, isn't applicable. So the deal was completed on a handshake and nothing else, a virtual handshake, of course. But, now your customer owes you money. Might be a little money, a lot of money, doesn't really matter. But what we can agree on is that this company that owes you money agreed with you to take some of your containers in exchange for they would give you money. Easy, right? So what's broken? Well, they have your containers and you don't have their money. So what do you do now? There's a couple of factors involved that may help perhaps slightly change our strategy, but overall the strategy is the same. So the first factor is communication, and by far, it's the most important part of the equation. Communication is good, this is likely going to go well. If it's not, probably not. So let's ask ourselves, how has communication changed with your customer who owes you money? Was it good in the past and not so good now? The other factor is, how long has it been a customer? Brand new customer, or perhaps an existing customer for a long time? So the communication part really holds the key component. And the biggest and best piece of advice that I can share with you on new customers, ones that are paying you the way they should, or perhaps even a little bit slow, is a very proactive approach. So when I say new, I mean a customer of yours for less than a year. With this section of your customer base, my recommendation is a proactive approach, very positive, that starts before payment is due. So I'm not saying that this is a collection call whatsoever, but what I am saying is we should make a proactive call to this customer, and that call probably sounds something like this. So let me introduce Margaret, who represents us, the creditor, which we'll call Robert's Container Sales, Billy Bob, who's your customer. I'm obviously playing both parts. So, hello, can I speak with Billy Bob, please? Well, this is Billy Bob. Billy Bob, it's Margaret with Robert's Container Sales. Do you have a minute, or is this a bad time? No, I have a minute. What's up? Hey, well, Billy Bob, I wanted to reach out to you today because we haven't spoken since the pandemic started, and I wanted to see how you're doing. And I also wanted to make sure that you know how thankful we are for a partnership. So I want to say thanks for making sure that the invoices we send you monthly are processed timely. During the crazy days of today, everyone isn't paying us as prompt as you are, and I want you to know that you're really appreciated. So before I let you go, is there anything I can do to make your day a little better? So now let's talk about an existing customer, similar situation. Should you call them before payment is due? Well, again, not a collection call, but I'm not sure if you can convince me that there isn't a good reason to call a good customer, even that's paying you the way they should, and thank them for their partnership, thank them for the prompt payments. So the point that I want to be very clear is that the proactive approach, in order to reduce the number of delinquent customers, is simply put the most important step that you can take. Don't allow receivable issues to become an issue. Proactively resolve them. So now let's move on to the next stage, in which a customer owes you money, but kind of it's a problem account. How do we deal with problem accounts? Again, we're going to assume there's no credit application or PG. So let's go back to that communication piece and the importance of the same. So in this time, somebody in your organization was hopefully contacting them, asking for money, right? But perhaps there's no communication. And again, that communication is so key. So let's assume that maybe there's a little bit of communication, but when your employee calls and trying to get resolved, they haven't been able to get a resolution in this. So I mentioned one of your employees calling, proactively making these calls, and I say this because it helps our calls by using simple human psychology. If Margaret is making these proactive calls for you, when you step in, it becomes an escalation issue. So now the customer thinks, wait a minute, it's no longer Margaret, now it's Robert. Something might be escalating in this, and there's certainly some more importance in perhaps resolving this and this measure. So, pure simple psychology. But depending on how long it's been, the past due accounts receivable, if it's a little bit past due, the call probably is going to sound something like this. Starting with Margaret. Hi, can I speak to Billy Bob? It's Billy Bob. Hi, this is Billy Bob. Hey, I wanted to reach out and make sure that the invoice that was due to our company last week was actually in process to be paid. You mind checking on that while I hold for a minute? So now Billy Bob comes back and says, I checked with my accounts payable person. She said it's scheduled for payment next week. So Margaret can reply, great. What day do you think I'll have my check? And wait for an answer. And at that point is the most important part of the call. Margaret should say, Billy Bob, listen, I appreciate you looking into this for me and taking care of it. I also want to ask you, if you don't mind, what happened to cause the payment to be late? Wait for an answer. So thanks for sharing that reason for me. But I want to be clear that we're really thankful for our partnership. What do you think I might be able to do to ensure that going forward, our invoices are paid timely? So again, wait for an answer. Don't allow yourself not to get an answer. But let's say Billy Bob says, listen, I don't think there's anything that you can do to help us resolve that. A great response. Well, that's good to hear, but can I confirm with you that this means going forward, we won't have this issue again? And more importantly, if we do, can you agree with me to give me a call before the invoice is past due and let me know about it? And it's because we value our relationship. And if you're having some issues, we want to work with you on that. But the communication is super, super important. So before I let you go, is there anything else you can do or that I can do for you to make life a little bit easier or your day better than today? So finally, let's talk about the customer that isn't paying you the way they should and there's no communication, right? These are the difficult ones. So they won't respond to any communication. Basically, you're getting radio silence. In these cases, it's obviously more difficult to resolve. And if there's any solace in this situation, it's simply that you don't have to decide to take actions to protect your business and finances. In fact, it's your customer who's making the decision for you. So I find that most of the time, these situations don't just kind of pop up out of the blue. Instead, there were signs and indicators along the way. Slow payments, perhaps, communication started to decline, and sometimes your customer was asking for additional business with you. So these types of signs are certainly indicators that there could be an issue, especially with slow payment. So up until this point, Margaret had been leaving messages that aren't getting returned and, no email responses. And, we previously mentioned the psychology of you personally getting involved, which is subtle, yet it's a powerful indicator in itself. So Margaret's called a couple times, hasn't got payment. Now it's your turn to call. Why? Again, even if you don't make contact, but you leave a message, psychologically, the customer now feels that something happening is different. It's no longer Margaret. Now it's Robert himself calling. And I wonder if this situation is escalating. So attempting to call a customer who isn't communicating, there's 100 things that you can do, but I want to share a couple important things. One, tonality. When you call and speak to somebody, if you can or leave a message, you have to be professional. Although you're upset because you haven't been paid, the feeling should not be evident on any call you made or any message you leave. Remember, you're a professional. Next thing, are you calling all the phone numbers available? Cell phones, home phone, office line, etc. Remember, with very little effort, there's a lot of information you can find out about somebody with the internet. Second, are you able to speak with anybody who will listen? If you can speak with a receptionist or anybody, even not the person who's writing the check, leave a message, leave a detailed message. It's a business transaction. You're more than okay in leaving a message so that hopefully the word's getting to the person that's going to get you paid. Listen, another thing is get a home address for the principal of the business. In many cases, you can find this information through many resources on the internet. and that allows you to possibly knock on their door if it's local. But even more importantly, you can mail a letter there, both a certified letter and a regular letter, to make sure that they actually do get the letter. Of course, you're trying everything that you can. And finally, find relatives of the principal of the company to contact. Again, through internet research, this information is very readily available. Feel free to call a relative of the principal that owes you money. Of course, I wouldn't call them and badger them for collection of the account, but you can certainly leave a message. Hey, I'm trying to get in touch with Billy Bob. Would you mind leaving a message for him? And again, we're only using this strategy because it's your customer who's decided not to communicate with you the way they should. One other thing, call your competitors, talk to them about this customer. It's interesting how reciprocation works when this practice is started. But ultimately, all these steps that you're trying to do, you're really just trying to cover every base that you can to get this issue resolved. And in the end, if you're not getting this resolved, it's your customer that's making the decision for you to call in the professionals. So I have a couple questions here also that you can see, and we can get these shared with you as well. Questions that are great to ask your customer when you are able to get them on the phone. What do you see as next action steps? What's changed since we last talked? Great questions lead to better communication, and better communication usually helps to resolve these types of issues a little bit quicker. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it back over to Vinny, who'd like to add a few things as well. But thank you very much.
So thanks a lot, Robert, for the very insightful presentation. I just wanted to add a few things about how Exchange approaches to help the customers with their accounts receivable. So customers at Exchange, they do their one-way container moves, which sometimes involves some financial terms. That means that in the end, they will have to manage invoices between their partners in that transaction. Some feedback we got from customers was that managing all these invoices was complicated and leads to a major coordination effort, and would also involve very high bank fees for sometimes small transactions. In the end, how we try to help them with this solution, with this challenge, is our solution that Exchange is their single invoicing partner. So they receive, for all transactions they do on the platform, they will receive one invoice from Exchange that summarizes the whole activity of the month. And whenever they have to pay or get paid, they only have to contact Exchange. And how we want to make this transparent to everyone is through our Exchange wallet, which is basically like your bank account, your PayPal account. You see all the activity that's going on during the month. You can check all details, and you can get in contact with us anytime if you have any updates or questions. So if you're an Exchange member or not, and you have any questions about how we help customers with their payments, you can contact me anytime. So now we can go to our Q&A session. We received a few questions from the attendees. So the first one is from Gulnari. What can you tell us about the collection agencies? Isn't it better to just sue someone that isn't paying instead of using a collection agency? What can a collection agency do that I can't do myself?
Great question. I get asked this one a lot. So a couple things. One, psychology. By you handling it yourself and then giving it to a professional increases the urgency in your customer, who realizes other actions may start to occur. So why should I use a collection agency instead of an attorney? It's never instead. It's simply before. Collection agencies typically work contingency basis. If a collection agency can get your issue resolved 30, 60, or 90 days, that's a good thing, and you get your money back. If not, the next step, depending on how much money owed, of course, is an attorney. But of course, you end up spending money with an attorney, and spending good money to chase bad money isn't always the best first step to take. Next question.
So I've had a customer who has been a great customer for a long time, and now he's saying he can't make any payment to me. what suggestions can you give on how I should handle this?
Great question. And of course, in our world, we see that all the time. So if you're able to communicate with him, you can basically work your way into a position where somebody admits to you that they're choosing not to pay you or they're choosing to pay you. If you have communications, they say they can't pay you anything, that really means they don't want to pay you anything. And I say that because they're probably paying other people, such as the electric company, their rent, etc. So you have to figure out how you can communicate with somebody to get them to start the process of payment. And of course, communication is the key. Do we have any other questions, Vinny?
Yeah, I would have one last question here from Peter. Is there a key thing that everyone forgets that will make payments easier in any situation, other than better communication?
Yes, and that's why I made a big point of it in my presentation. That first proactive call when somebody doesn't owe you money yet, letting them know that you're thinking about them, you appreciate their partnership, proactive before collection becomes an issue, by far the best way to handle it.
Oh, cool. So then before we end the webinar, a very last question just came from Mukta. If a customer asks for more time to process the invoice, how many days would you give them?
Great question. I don't ever extend time without some activity on their part. So they owe you $1,000 and they say they need more time. Ask them how much they can pay today. Maybe they can't pay 1,000. Maybe they can only pay 100. But the fact is, if they're willing to give you some money today, their words, meaning they're going to pay you later, have much more viability than their words without an action, which is some sort of payment. Anything else?
No, I think that's it, Robert. Thanks a lot for joining us, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. It's going to be available for the next couple of weeks in the same with the same link. So,
awesome. Thank you guys so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day, and best regards.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.